I've been playing Titanfall 2 for around 6 to 7 years now. I've touched and interacted with many subsections of the Titanfall 2 communities, and I've clocked in over 2.5 thousand hours between both console and PC. However, Titanfall 2 is such a deep and buggy game that despite its age, I'm still learning new things about it pretty frequently. Misinformation and hidden knowledge in this game go hand in hand, and people are still holding on to beliefs that are severely outdated, one of which is the subject of this video, Monarch. Now, why am I making this video now? Well, a certain video made by a fellow content creator, Kaluka, dropped onto my radar quite recently. Now, I've known about this video ever since it was released, but I never bothered to watch it because, well, quite frankly, I've heard the same opinion over and over again that Monarch is overpowered, yada yada, and so, at the time, I didn't really consider it worth watching. However, I had some time to spare, and towards the end of my trip in Japan, another video of his popped up, this time about Titanfall 2 snipers. Now, aside from some misinformation, this recent video isn't really that bad. So, it got me curious. How could I finally watch that Monarch video? I've got nothing else for this bullet train ride, so let's see what he's got to say. And spoiler warning, there's a lot to discuss. Now, disclaimer, I'm not hating on Kaluka, he sounds like a pretty chill dude, and it's just unfortunate that a sweaty loser like me is gonna dissect his video. A lot of things I know are from literal years of experience and by talking to the various people in the Titanfall 2 community, so don't hate on this guy for not knowing some things. There are also a few things outside of Monarch that he mentions that are questionable, to say the least, so we'll be talking about those things too. Anyways, just sit back, relax, and enjoy my analysis.
For example, Ronin, the Samurai Titan, is a monster at close range for all enemies, but has very little health and almost no functional defenses at a distance.
This is a minor nitpick, but saying Ronin has almost no functional defenses at a distance is plain wrong. Unless you mean means of retaliation through range, then yeah, I guess that's true. But if we're talking strictly defense, Ronin has Sword Block, which is one of the best, if not the best defensive ability in the game. And he also has Phase Dash, which allows him to close the gap or to escape his opponents into a more favorable position. Again, minor nitpick, but I thought it was worth rectifying.
You might be worried that this video is playing secret demonic frequencies that only the most religiously attuned viewers can hear, but I wouldn't worry about that, because Monarch is the nearly undisputed champ of this game.
This is one of the first things in the video that is very, very wrong. If we're talking about the best Titans in this game, realistically, Monarch doesn't even make it into the top 3. Now, to give Kaluka credit, he does mention shortly after that there is a school of thought that Ronin is better, and, well, I'm here to tell you that overall, yes, Ronin is quite a bit better than Monarch, alongside Northstar, Ion, Tone, and Legion. Wait a minute, it's like all the Titans besides Scorch. Well, you'd be correct. But how, you may ask? Well, Kaluka will bring us into this next point.
But for my money, I think Monarch is just more consistent. Monarch isn't super unreasonably overpowered or anything, it's just doing stuff that Titans really shouldn't be doing. It's useful in all situations, it loses no matchups.
Oh boy, okay, so first of all, to say that Monarch loses no matchups is pretty insane, because she does lose quite a bit of them. So let's go through all of them one by one. Starting with her favorable matchups, let's get the obvious one out of the way, Scorch. Monarch can easily outrun, outrange, and out-DPS the Scorch, even with no upgrades. Her Exo 16 allows her to deal consistent damage outside the range of Scorch's Thermite, and whatever stray shots do hit her, she can stomach those with some well-placed siphons, which I also want to add that you can actually bypass the Thermo Shield entirely with Siphon if you aim towards the Scorch's foot. This matchup becomes even more one-sided if you put Arc Rounds into the equation, because that removes Scorch's only means of negating damage. For Monarch, this is a pretty easy win. Next is Ronin. Now, despite what I said earlier about Ronin being better, Monarch does have the advantage in this matchup. Chain Gun does heavy sustained damage to Ronin so that he can't simply block and punish, while Monarch's mobility allows her to stay safe during her reload time. Energy Siphon is also mostly unaffected by block, and impairs Ronin's mobility and sensitivity, which are crucial to him. All in all, this is a pretty good matchup for her. She just has to play in the appropriate range. Because even though she does have an advantage in the matchup, a Ronin with Overcore, who pushes super aggressively and manages their shots and abilities well, can still overwhelm a Monarch if they get their Sword Core early enough. Now, besides those two Titans, it's pretty much all downhill from here. Ion is the quintessential soft counter for Monarch. Vortex Shield allows Ion to deny the Energy Siphon, and also allows her to reflect Monarch's bullets back towards her. Alongside the Laser Shot and Tripwires, an Ion has many tools to keep a Monarch at bay with good poke and chip damage. However, this dynamic completely changes if Monarch gets arc rounds, because in that case, she can just chase the Ion down and drain her Vortex. No Vortex means no energy, which means an Ion can do nothing except cry. Otherwise, a good Ion beats a Monarch any other time. Tone has two things that completely destroy a Monarch: Particle Wall and Rockets. Now, Monarch can easily destroy a Particle Wall with Rocket Salvo, but she still has to shoot down the wall with extra bullets. If she decides to rush down the Tone, well then she just dies due to the DPS difference and the Salvo core. And with the luxury of splash damage and not needing a direct line of sight to deal damage with the rockets, Tone can easily outpoke the Monarch as well. All in all, it's not looking good for Monarch here. Legion. Legion has high health, high damage, and gun shield. If Monarch faces a Legion head-on, even at max upgrades, they will always lose that 1v1. They also lose the poke game, because Legion has access to power shots, which, as you know, can be for both long and short range. North Star. Now, Monarch does have a chance if she gets close enough and bum rushes the North Star. However, this requires the North Star to actually allow you to get close, because as the Sniper Titan, her whole deal is killing you from range, and it's not like she has to expose herself for very long to do it. Again, Monarch loses the poke game and dies. Now, these matchups are definitely a bit more complicated than that, but this isn't basically Monarch, and there's still 25 minutes left in Kaluka's video. Also, if we take upgrades into the situation, at level 3, Monarch would still lose to North Star and Legion, because again, their poke and burst damage potential is just that good.
Monarch is not only the only Titan in the game which can give itself temporary health almost at will, but it's intentionally designed to heal over the course of the game more than other Titans. For one, Monarch can steal batteries without rodeoing, which is huge because it means you can steal a battery without exiting your Titan. Anytime a Monarch gets a finisher on another Titan, it steals their battery.
Okay, so, yes, Monarch is the only Titan in the game who is able to get batteries off an execution, aka they don't need to rodeo. But you need a specific kit to do so. So if you have that one kit, then yes, if you get an execution, you'll steal a battery. If you don't, however, then that's just not true.
Finishers happen when a Titan melees another Titan who's had their health reduced to 0, after which you enter the doomed state and take increased damage on a shorter health bar.
You actually don't take increased damage once you're doomed. You get the same amount of HP, aka 2,500 hit points, as one standard health bar.
Getting hit with a finisher stops your possibility for escape and guarantees the kill, which is bad, but getting hit with a finisher is usually not a significantly big deal. The enemy does get some ultimate charge, and they refill their shields, which is pretty rough, but that's about it.
You in fact do not refill your shields when you pull off an execution on any Titan besides that one specific execution on Monarch.
Other Titans have to rely on their defensive abilities to prevent damage from occurring at all, whereas Monarch can just shrug that damage back off over and over and over again. Tone, for instance, has a really good defensive tool, maybe like the third best or so in the game, where it displays a huge one-way shield that allows it to shoot at enemies without risk of being shot back. As you can imagine, this is a really great ability, but here's the thing, it doesn't move. It forces Tone to stay in this one spot to be able to utilize it. If you were to flank or push this Tone, you could get around this problem. And again, this is something that goes for every single other defensive ability in the game. In some way or another, they're all flawed and therefore exploitable, like for example being slowed or not being able to shoot. Monarch, on the other hand, just shoots this little beam at you. If nothing else, just compare the downtime here.
Now I get the point Kaluka is trying to make here. Compared to all the other defensive abilities in the game, Monarch's is the easiest and simplest one to use, and he tries to make a point about how the defensives besides F-Siphon are all flawed and exploitable, and that's true, but in terms of pure defensive ability, Siphon is kinda mid. Now extra shield is extra shield. You can take more damage at the end of the day, but you're not actually preventing damage. Sure, if you keep topping yourself off, if you never let your main health bar dip, then I guess the Siphon is better, but in those situations, you're hardly ever going to lose anyways because the enemy team is not doing their job good enough and not shooting you. And shields don't prevent one crucial thing: gaining core charge. Shooting into a vortex or shooting into a particle wall don't really accomplish anything, but shooting into somebody who has shields is a no-brainer since you're getting core charge and you have to chip through it anyway to do real damage. Let's go back to the particle wall. Yes, it does have its flaws and weaknesses, but in return, its strengths are really good. With a particle wall, you're locking down a line of sight. Anywhere you have a particle wall deployed, your enemies will have to react accordingly. Ions don't have any good means of destroying the wall, Legions can't really destroy the wall on their own either, Scourge can't break down the wall unless they have a core, and opposing Tones don't have a great way to destroy a wall either, unless they get locks on you and use their tracking rockets to destroy it. As for the Titans who can destroy the particle wall easily, you have North Star, Monarch, and Ronin. No-Star can destroy the wall with a fully charged shot and one uncharged shot, Monarch can destroy the wall with one salvo and a couple of bullets from the XO16, and finally Ronin can destroy the wall with one arc wave. However, this is if you're going against a regular tone shield. Reinforced Particle Wall makes this thing even stronger, and now basically Ronin can only deal with this wall. As you can see, Particle Wall is very strong as a defensive ability. I know if I'm face to face with the Particle Wall with a tone on the other side, I usually have to run away or force myself to push through the shield and deal with the consequences of that. Now compare that to Energy Siphon. Oh cool, you get like a quarter of your shield bar back. Who cares? I don't really have to respect the shield gain as nearly as much as any other defensive ability, and that's the one major weakness of Monarch. She has no tools to effectively stall pushes and assaults. She has mobility, yes, but when it comes down to it, she gets absolutely slaughtered in any 1v2 due to the lack of real damage mitigation. And I would also like to add that if you know a Siphon is coming, depending on the Titan you're playing, you have options besides making the Monarch try to miss. Vortex, Flame Shield, Gun Shield, Particle Wall, Phase, though it depends on the situation, really.
Robot, which isn't even counting the fact that Monarch doesn't actually have to shoot you, or any of your allies, because Monarch can use this ability on NPCs.
Yes, you can use the Siphon on NPCs, but unless you hit multiple grunts or specters though, the shield gain is pretty negligible, and even in the same clip, you can see your shield gain get pretty much deleted in like 1 second. The only time siphoning NPCs is worth it is when you siphon them all in a big group, or if you target a big target like dropships or reapers, since you get more shields from those guys. However, dropships are map and RNG dependent, and reapers don't usually come out until later in the match. And while you can argue that monarchs can just sit in the back and farm shields off NPCs with no real danger, this process still takes like almost a whole minute. Now I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever had anybody farm shields off of grunts that consistently.
And if all of that wasn't enough, Monarch even has a unique passive trait that allows itself to exit the doomed state, which no other Titan can do by grabbing a battery. Even when you kill a Monarch, it may not truly be dead. Luckily, this is an optional part of the loadout, and most people don't run it, but unlike everybody else, they can.
So here, Kaluka is talking about Survival of the Fittest, which is one of Monarch's choosable kits. The potential of getting out of the doom state is pretty strong, but not really. As big of an upside as this sounds, choosing this kit means that you basically aren't running a kit at all until you get doomed. And even then, getting a battery to heal yourself isn't guaranteed unless you're saving a battery boost.
Shot. Titan weapons having situational downsides was integral to the survival of pilots who tried to take them down, and is part of what makes pilot versus Titan gameplay as fun as it is. A pilot knows they can maneuver around a North Star's low fire rates, or catch a Legion out of position with their assault cannon undeployed, or outrange a Ronin or whatever, so on and so forth. And of course this also reflects in the Titan versus Titan matchups. The XO16, however, doesn't really have a weakness.
Well, I can tell you why the XO16 doesn't have a weakness. Monarch needs some form of consistency. Monarch is all about survival, right? So she needs tools that allow her to get that job done, but they still need to be kept in check so that surviving with her remains skillful. That's why she doesn't have something like Vortex Shield, since that would cover a major weakness in her kit and would make her too strong. So that's why Respawn gave her mobility options and consistency with the XO16, because she would either be too weak or too strong with anything else. In fact, let's go through all the Titan weapons and how Monarch would fare with them. The Splitter Rifle. With this, Monarch now needs to keep track of an energy bar, which isn't that crazy considering the energy pool only serves the rifle, but now Monarch can hardly deal with ranged threats as the Splitter Rifle does low damage and has lower accuracy at range. The Plasma Railgun. Okay, well, if I had to be honest, this would probably be an actual upgrade for her, but that's because the railgun is just that good. Monarchs could farm core so easily with this weapon at range that, not gonna lie, this would be way too overpowered, so she can't get her hands on this gun. The Predator Cannon. She wouldn't be able to toggle firing mode since she has a different tactical, so I'm going to go over the different firing modes separately. In short range mode, again, she can't really deal with long range threats with accuracy, so that's pretty bad. And in long range mode, the zoom is a little too much, and so she would struggle in close range. Alongside the detriments of having to rev up the gun and the slowdown you have while having the gun ready, Monarchs would be sitting ducks, which isn't exactly ideal in the fast-paced shooter. The 40mm cannon. Now, surprisingly, I don't think this is the worst option for her, but while her pilot killing potential is really high now, she'll struggle in doing any real damage against Titans. And considering that the biggest threat to your survival is Titans, that doesn't really bode well for Monarch. The Lead Wall. This removes the idea of range from Monarch completely. While she's now decently okay in close combat, especially if you take the rearm dashes into account, the payoff is not worth it. The whole point of Monarch is to not put yourself into really dangerous situations. The lead wall, however, would force her to go up close to enemies and take damage. Keep doing that with no phase or sword block, she would basically be free core charge for anybody. The thermite launcher. Again, her range and consistency potential would be a lot lower. She'll have more downtime because of the reloading, and she has to gamble whether her launcher does more damage or not depending on how the flames come out. All these weapons, save for the railgun, will make her infinitely worse to play, and the only reason the other weapons work on their respective Titan is because they have the abilities to supplement them. That's why the Exo-16, in my opinion, isn't a problem. It's a versatile weapon because it needs to be in order for Monarch to be any sort of good.
Trying to push a Monarch and get aggressive with it can be a losing proposition in many cases as well, because Monarch retreats exceptionally. It's not the best runaway Titan. That goes to Northstar, who's really fast, has 3 dashes, and can literally shoot a little mine that locks other Titans into one position, but Northstar is minced meat if you get close, and Monarch just isn't.
To say that Monarch doesn't get owned in close range is false. Again, Legion exists, Tone exists, and Ronin exists, all of which can do more damage to Monarchs in that close range a lot faster than the Monarch can deal that damage out. We're also ignoring the fact that cores exist, so if they get that, you're cooked no matter what you do. The only advantage Monarch has here is the mobility, which she needs to use so that she doesn't directly face these guys in that 1v1 scenario.
The rocket salvo in a vacuum isn't really the most powerful thing about Monarch by any means, they're just another thing that Monarch has. Rockets are a pretty vanilla damaging ability. It's everything outside of that vacuum that is a problem, though. To explain this tangent, though, we have to go on another tangent and talk about how good Monarch is versus pilots. Because Monarch is outrageously good at killing pilots.
Gluka then goes on to say about how being bad at killing pilots is a weakness that could have been something that Monarch had, but just isn't. I mean, yeah, but I don't think that's a bad thing specifically for her. There are already 3 other Titans that consistently do a better job at killing pilots than Monarch, and the other 3 depend a bit more on your skill at aiming. If you look at it as a whole, Monarch's pilot killing potential isn't that crazy compared to the whole cast.
Against Titans, the rockets are also capable of some pretty significant burst damage, mostly because of one of Monarch's other abilities, which is Rearm and Reload, which allows it to reload all of its other cooldowns instantly. This means you can dump a rocket pod into somebody, rearm and reload, and then do it again. Or more accurately, you can mag dump somebody with the Exo-16, stun them, rocket pod them, rearm and reload, rocket pod them, and stun them again. Again, a lack of burst damage is something that could have been sort of a downside for Monarch,
but her lack of burst damage is a downside. Yes, they can have the potential of doing some decent damage, but you also have to think about other things besides raw damage. While she can do burst damage, hers is so much more inconsistent than other Titans. This scenario you described where you dump a rocket pod into somebody, rearm, and do it again, or mag dumping them with the Exo-16, then siphon, then rocket pod, then rearm, rocket pod again, and then stun them again? Well, good luck doing that against somebody who can actually use their keyboard. Remember, shooting, rearming, and siphon all don't happen instantly. Rockets are also projectiles and travel at a moderate speed, so it's pretty easy to miss them at a distance or to only hit a couple rockets. That's why most people only use rockets in close range, where you can splash their feet for that consistent damage. And, well, being in close range can be pretty dangerous for a Monarch. I already described the matchups earlier, but yeah, the rocket burst damage is not worth dying over. On that topic, all the other Titans have a way easier time doing this burst damage. Ronin has Lead Wall, Legion has Power Shot, Northstar has Railgun, Scorch has his launcher, Ion has Laser Shot, and Tone has her rockets, all of which carry a lot less risk and a whole lot more consistency than the Monarch's measly rockets.
Every Titan in this game does have great peaks, but they can also have some pretty rough valleys. Monarch is just less explosive and inconsistent than everybody else. It's always just kind of good.
Monarch is not an all-situation Titan. To say she's always kinda good is wrong. Sometimes a Monarch is just a Titan you don't need. If I need a Titan to anchor my position or to stall a push, let's just say Monarch would not be my first choice. And her effectiveness overall is pretty inconsistent because, if I had to be honest, a big part of her effectiveness is whether or not your opponents are good enough to even target you. In fact, I would say her peaks are a bit lower than the average Titan while she maintains that same level of low.
do. The worst offense of all of this is how it combines to make a Titan that is just kind of annoying to fight. If you leave a Monarch alone, it can slowly farm NPCs, gameplay dependent, or long-range damage to be able to upgrade and eventually become a problem. If you go after it as a pilot, it might just be a death sentence. If you try to keep it at long range, it might be better at fighting you than your Titan is at fighting it. And of course, the Monarch player can just hide from you or leave.
Well, yeah, target priority is a real thing. Monarch only becomes a problem if you let her. Now this might be a stretch, but I like to treat her as the medic of Titanfall 2. If I don't target them with extreme prejudice, they'll eventually get an Uber, aka level 3. Which is why hitting your burst damage is so important. At a base level, all the Titans in the game can do more potential damage than their Monarch. So if you never let that Monarch get too many upgrades off, they're essentially just piloting a lesser Titan, always.
If you can pinch Monarch into a bad position, it goes down just like anything else, but Monarch doesn't have any Monarch-specific bad situations. All the times where Monarch is in a bad way, every other Titan would also be in a bad way. There's really nothing about Monarch that you can take advantage of.
Well, let me list some things that you can take advantage of on a Monarch. Monarch cannot stall pushes or anchor her teammates. Monarch can't do consistent burst damage. Say there are two legions. Monarch would have a much harder time dealing with those guys than a Tone. You can take advantage of Monarch's inability to mitigate damage, aka you don't have to worry about missing out on damage if you shoot her, since she doesn't have an ability like Vortex Shield.
If you're doing this as a Scorch or a Legion, it's very possible that it will outpace you. If you're playing as Tone or Ion, then you can definitely keep up with it. Ion being pretty even, but Tone can seriously get outdamaged by a Monarch.
Ow. Tone with Overcore and Rocket Barrage can get Salvo Core in 3 bursts, and then the Monarch is dead even with upgrades. And also, Monarch has to work to get that damage output through those upgrades. Meanwhile, Tone just has that damage potential 24/7.
There's just no real good strategy for dealing with a Monarch outside of very obvious things like outnumber them or use an ultimate. Again, I might be making this sound a lot worse than it really is. Monarch doesn't ruin the game or anything, it's just that Titanfall's Titan gameplay was so spectacular before they got here.
Well, you would be right, Kaluka. I've played Titanfall 2 competitively, specifically Last Titan Standing. And hey, I've even won a tournament. And what I can tell you is that Titanfall 2's Titan gameplay is still spectacular. As for Monarch, well, you'll be happy to know that she is the least picked Titan overall because she's simply not that good and very situational. In fact, Scorch is picked more over her because he performs pretty well in Crash Site in Complex. In every other map though, a lot of people tend to pick other Titans because they just simply do more.
But what used to be what I would say is like, I don't know, 90% of the time exciting and frantic and interesting, and 10% of the time kind of a pain, went more to like an 80-20 ratio, just because dealing with Monarch isn't quite as fun as everybody else. It doesn't ruin your day or anything, it's just like, you know, you see that Monarch over there and you think, I do have to deal with that, but I just kind of wish maybe it wasn't Monarch.
Now, I know this is more of a personal take, but I want to share my own experience. The only times I've ever hated or felt like Monarch was a pain to deal with is when they get to max core or if I'm playing Ion and they have arc rounds. And even then, I don't really ever blame the Monarchs, but I find myself often blaming myself or my team for not shooting the guy enough. Again, this is just my personal experience. I will say, however, that clearly Kaluka, you haven't experienced Titan Brawl Rise, where the entire enemy team is just North Stars and Legions and 3-lane long sightline hell.
Everyone who isn't Monarch gets 2 universal perks and 1 Titan-specific perk to change and customize. Monarch gets all of that and its 3 upgrades, each of which have 3 separate selections. Before even knowing what any of these do, the versatility is comparatively off the charts. You're unlikely to see anything outside of the meta loadout, which involves heavy investment into the Exo-16. Even so, the point remains that Monarch can change their build if needed to a greater degree than everybody else.
Well, I think that's okay. Changing upgrades is the big thing that makes Monarch unique, and is why she's among my favorite Titans to play as well. Just because she doesn't follow the standard cookie cutter rules of the other Titans doesn't mean that she's unhealthy for the game, because whether you like it or not, Monarch is ultimately not an overpowered Titan. Her effectiveness is truly dictated by everybody in the lobby, and I don't think people using their brains to play differently when a certain threat arises is a bad thing. Now, he also goes on to address the upgrades themselves, and I will say the only real problem that Monarch has is that goddamn tier 1 upgrade. Arc rounds. It's basically mandatory because, yeah, it increases your already consistent Exo-16 with 10 more rounds and the ability to drain shields, which means you now basically outright counter Scorch and Ion pretty hard. Other than that, all the other upgrades are pretty alright in comparison.
And that brings up another funny thing about Monarch in that Monarch is the only Titan whose ultimate almost can't be wasted.
Now this is technically true, but you have to understand, Monarch's core is the only one that doesn't do anything on the macro scale. Sure, you're upgrading yourself, and if you're already max, you're regaining shields, but that's more of a micro impact. You're becoming better, but this is something that happens over time. All the other cores in the game though, do damage. They can kill, they can progress the game. While Monarch's core is a slow burn, every other Titan's core is an explosion, and in this game, these explosions can be a lot more impactful anyways. And well, actually that's it. Again, don't send hate to Kaluka, I've dabbled in this game way more than I should, and also, you don't necessarily have to take my word for gospel, this is just my perspective through my experience. Anyways, like, subscribe, join the Discord, all that good stuff, and I'll see ya in the next one. Peace.